Please do welcome Susan Upton. Hello. As a survivor of child sexual abuse and as a survivor of clergy abuse, I want to begin by saying thank you, Andrew, for this vital piece of work. And as an ordained priest in the Church of England, I want to thank God that you have listened. Like the lawyer who knew what mercy was when he saw it in the Samaritan, you have gone and done likewise. Not only for those who you've advocated for, but for the readers of this tract. It is accessible, to the point, sometimes excruciatingly so, and most importantly, raises some theological challenges. I want to speak first about surviving the dog collar. Our church institution is a medieval edifice built within the context of feudalism, which in turn was built upon the foundation of a crumbling empire. Feudalism and imperialism are intrinsic to our ecclesiology, our liturgy, and our theological concepts. So vicars in the 21st century, whilst on the one hand are trying not to identify with those two millstones, they must on the other hand learn to function as a CEO of a corporation. I actually went on an archdeaconry training day to be tutored by an actual CEO how to market our wares. I kid you not. Our priestly identity is stripped right away from us. The chaos that Andrew notes in church responses to victims is perhaps an external sign of an internal state. We tighten up, fearing to put a foot wrong, hence the managerialism that Andrew puts into his assessment of the church. He also writes of a vacuum of theological diagnosis, which actually was the first statement that raised my eyebrow. So I asked a former colleague what spiritual and theological elements are now included in safeguarding training. This was 2 days ago. And he said, "Oh, we didn't touch on any of that. Both the basic and leadership training was a self-preservation exercise by the institution, treating people who have been abused as objects and problems to be identified and protected. Broken people who need to be done unto, rather than spiritual exemplars who are frequently more real than most." So when it comes to clergy training, there may be a vacuum. It may also be a vacuum within the church leadership. However, there is no vacuum when it comes to the material produced over the last 3 decades. In 1991, that's 31 years ago, James Poling published a book called The Abuse of Power, a Theological Problem. Does what it says on the tin. In 2000, Bound to Sin was Professor McFadden's analysis of the idolatry at the heart of abusive relationships, a dynamic that Andrew explains very clearly for us. To be fair, by 2012, there had been very few works by survivor theologians when I was doing my work. But then 2 months after my own work on survivor spirituality was published, the Jimmy Savile story broke. The dam opened, and there has since been a flood of theologies of abuse. I'd like to say après moi le déluge. Therefore, church leaders have no excuse for dodging their diagnosis. It's there. Perhaps they have read about church-based abuse, but reading about something is not the same as knowing. You have to immerse yourself in a country for some time before you can truly speak their language. Just try going off to France, and when they start speaking back to you fast, you've had it. And so Andrew writes of abuse as a gaping hole in the church. This imagery reminded me of a reference in Catherine's book to the church member who referred to a particular survivor as a pastoral black hole, because no matter how much time, prayer and attention he was given, his condition never improved. Survivors are seen as nuisances. One of the women I interviewed, whom I called Joanna, was banned from Alpha courses because she asked too many awkward questions. I was so pleased to read Andrew's description that victims are our premier theologians. And he also says truthfully that the victimised individual is forced into a diminished version of their own personhood. But I want to comment on the second half of that sentence when you say, Andrew, the window through which their relationship with God is realised also shrinks. Yes, they have been, or still are, in the black hole, but they have survived. Some have kept their faith, some have deepened it. And I contend that if there is one thing we should retain, or perhaps rescue, from the medieval church, it is the exemplar we have of certain mystics. Mystics trod the path of darkness. Mystics willingly stripped themselves of their identity before God and knew that beyond their own agency is a God who acts only in mercy, love, and righteousness. Of course, this made mystics often into nuisances because they knew the true freedom of being agents of God, not beholden to the virtue signalling required by church leaders. No wonder the inquisitors burnt a few. Survivors have, by necessity, trodden that same dark path to save their souls. And it seems that by default they have entered the same spiritual lockers that the mystic enters voluntarily. And there they have found the same presence. Getting past victimhood means resting in the mercy of God who holds us as we heal and are restored. Priscilla was a victim of incest. She said this in her interview. If somebody said to me, you can go back and have that not happen, but not have that relationship with God, I would go through all of that again for that relationship. I wouldn't want to change that. If it was either or, there's nothing that would make me not want to have that relationship with God. It was awful and it was horrible, but I'd rather have that relationship than not have God. Now, this is a very tricky area. I'm still grappling with this daily. But as the Archbishop of York writes in his forewords to Andrew's tract, this is holy ground. We must tread lightly and even take off our shoes. When Andrew suggests that a kenotic ministry might be possible, I admit I was a little disappointed with the conditional tense. But as he so rightly indicates, the church must find its meaning. It must feel the wobble of its imperial foundations. We can see this already underway in our culture. And I'm going to state boldly now, God is not a king or a sovereign or a lord. Mercy, the presence of God in all life, is a different sort of power, and victims know it. Instead of the faith of Constantine, the church needs the faith of Mary Magdalene, who enters the black hole of the tomb. Astrophysicists tell us there is a singularity at the heart of a black hole. What if that singularity is bursting with resurrection vibes? I want to finish by referring to Korean theologian Chun Hyung Kyung. She caused a real stir at the 7th Assembly of the World Council of Churches in 1991, when in her lecture she invoked the Holy Spirit. She said, "I come from the land of spirits of Han. Han is anger. Han is resentment. Han is bitterness. Han is grief. Han is brokenheartedness and the raw energy for struggle for liberation." She said Han-ridden spirits are all over the place, spirits of the unjust dead seeking the chance to make the wrong right again. And it is the responsibility of living persons to listen to them and participate in the Spirit's work of righting the wrong. Han-ridden spirits are the agents through whom the Holy Spirit has spoken her compassion and wisdom for life. On reading Falling Among Thieves for the very first time, one word kept creeping up into my throat. For those who perpetrate abuse, sorry might be the hardest word, but for a victim who is beaten, forced into accepting their worthlessness at the hands of a tyrannical power who has fashioned themselves as your God, the hardest word to say, because you feel that band tightening round your throat and the panic settling in your chest, is a word of only one syllable and 2 letters. That word is no. And this is the spirit of Han. It lies behind every word Andrew has written. It is a spirit of outrage, and we need its energy to be able to stand up and say no, to join with the victims Andrew tells us are saying to the church, you are better than this, and no, I will accept nothing less than mercy.